Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So I like to cover infrastructure whenever possible, and I kind of usually resist doing anything in regards to home automation. However, I think that home automation has a significant component of infrastructure involved in it. And so today I want to discuss something that I have found near and dear over the years, and that is a discussion about self-hosted cameras. And so in January of 2023, I presented self-hosted camera magic, where I transcoded a 4K H.265 RTSP camera stream, and I used VLC to display it on my Google Chromecast 4K. And part of that reason was because there really wasn't any way to display an H.265 camera using Alexa, and there also wasn't a reasonable way to display it on a Fire TV stick, which is what I had at the time, and I still do. So the Android Debug Bridge is a tool used to connect from a PC server to a daemon on an Android device. And to imagine exactly what that is, specifically, it's a little bit like having a computer that has an SSH client connecting to Open SSH server on another computer. And so I kind of look at ADB as being that type of a tool, except for Android. And so ADB is open source and has been around since 2007, and it supports not only connection via USB, hence a lot of times it's referred to on target Android devices as USB debugging, but it can also provide connections over the network on TCP port number 5555. So we're going to use ADB from Home Assistant to display camera streams on a Fire TV 4K Max. So the real question here is, but why do we want to do that? And so there are already Alexa camera skills, but you need a skill for each camera manufacturer. So point in fact is I use Reolink cameras, and I've used the Reolink skill in the Amazon skill set, and I have also used the skill for the Amcrest cameras, and I've also used the skill for Wyze cameras. And then there really isn't a built-in skill for Unify cameras. So I wanted something that would cover everything. So I've used Monocle Gateway to standardize across all the different cameras. And as long as a camera could provide an RTSP stream, then I could just use Monocle Gateway to provide a way to handle displaying the cameras, not only on my Fire TV sticks, but also on my Echo Shows. Unfortunately, I have recently, in the last few months, moved from standard Alexa to Alexa Plus, and that obsoletes Monocle because there are stricter rules for the way that video streams need to be accessed. And frankly, they needed to do that, but it's somewhat of an annoyance because now it's basically rendered Monocle Gateway a moot point. And I really did like that, and I've used it for years. So ADB from Home Assistant is a completely local solution that does not involve any Alexa skills or validating of camera streams. And that's why I kind of gyrated over to it as an option. And so just so you're aware, my primary home automation is Habitat Elevation Hub, and I really like it in general. But I found that there's a lot of niche applications that have caused me to also have an installation of Home Assistant. And in fact, on the channel before, I've covered a couple of different installations for Home Assistant, the last of which was Home Assistant OS, because the original Home Assistant Supervised that I had shown how to install in an Incus VM has been deprecated in favor of Home Assistant OS. So I use Home Assistant OS kind of as a peripheral to Habitat. That being said, what I'm going to present in this video will work completely from Home Assistant, or I've done it from Habitat over to Home Assistant, but the primary automation is built into Home Assistant. So the downside of using the ADB solution that I'm going to present in this video is that this method won't work with Echo Show devices because they're more locked down. And that was a bit of a disappointment. However, my primary use case for displaying cameras with a voice command has been to display them on my Fire TV 4K Max 2nd Edition. And I'll tell you, one of my primary reasons for wanting to display them there is because I want to be able to see a 4K camera in true 4K. And I want to be able to see a 2K camera in true 2K. And many times when you were using the Alexa skills, you were down selecting the resolution of the camera. A good example of that was the Reolink skill, which never seemed to display a Reolink camera in its native resolution. So in order to do this, the first step is to go off and to prepare the Android device. And if you've never used ADB, there's a couple of steps that we need to perform. To begin with, you're going to go to your settings on your Android TV device, and that could be anything like an NVIDIA Shield or a Fire TV 4K Max like I have. And after you go to settings, you can go to About, and then you find the build number, you tap it 7 times, and then you will see developer options have been enabled. And once that happens, then you can go to settings, and then in settings you will see a developer options menu that has appeared, and you can turn on what is called USB debugging. And so if your device is Android 11 or later, in the developer options, and this is kind of dependent on the actual modified version of Android you might have, like Fire TV OS in the case of the Fire TV sticks, you might want to also enable an option called wireless debugging. And in the older versions of Android, USB debugging took care of making connections either over USB or making connections over the network for Android Debug Bridge. So when you connect to the Android TV device remotely the first time, you're going to get a pop-up message which asks for permission to connect. And you're going to tap Allow USB Debugging. And there's also normally a checkbox that says Always Allow, and we want to go ahead and check that as well so that future connections to ADB are always automated. And then your Android device, which could be something like a Fire Stick, an NVIDIA Shield, or any other type of Android TV device, is now capable of being remote controlled. Once you have USB debugging enabled on your Android TV device, when you head on over to Home Assistant, it should automatically detect that on your network there is an Android device, and so you'll see an Android Debug Bridge, which I'll go into in depth a little bit later in the video. But basically it looks like this, and in my case it's detected my Fire TV 4K Max, which is at address 192.168.30.16 in my particular case, and it documents that it has 2 entities. And then when you go down to look at the entities, one of the entities is just for monitoring your device, and the other entity is a media player entity. So in Home Assistant, entities are kind of like targets for executing operations that point to the particular hardware using whatever driver is necessary in order to accomplish that. And so then the next step is we have a series of automations. So in my automation area, I have a automation that is entitled Camera Button Pressed, and I have a series of virtual buttons. So virtual buttons are momentary switches. When you press them, they're on, and then they immediately turn themselves off. And I have a series of 16 buttons that I've named Show and then an underscore and the name of the camera. And so I have 16 cameras on my network. And then the actions for each camera, and here's a couple of examples, are that it is going to trigger the entity for the particular switch that is supposed to be enabled. And that is when it notices that that particular switch has been turned on, then it goes ahead and executes a script, and that is really the automation. So as an example, when the show front door momentary switch is activated, then it will go ahead and execute the action of running the show front door script. So what does the script itself look like? Well, it's a script that's located in scripts.yaml as part of Home Assistant. And here's an example of my show driveway script, and realize that in my scripts.yaml, I have all of the scripts listed out there. So we have an alias, which is show driveway. The mode is single. And then it says the service is Android TV.adb _command. And then the target is the entity ID that we looked at earlier in the Android debug bridge, called media _player .fire _TV family room. And so that's the name of the device for my particular Fire TV. And then it has a command that it's going to execute. So what that command is first of all, it has the keyword AM, and that stands for Activity Manager. So Activity Manager is the mechanism by which we deploy commands to the Android debug bridge. Secondly, we have the command start, and start says we're going to start a particular application. And then I have the activity, and that's what -a means, of android.intent.action.view, and that's either going to open or display a particular link. And so the destination is this RTSP string, and in this particular case, this is a real link camera. Your RTSP string will differ depending upon the manufacturer of your camera. So I have an RTSP : / whatever my username is, / whatever my password is, and then an @ sign with the address of the camera. And normally by default, RTSP streams are handled over port 554, but your camera may differ. And then you have a particular place where it is located on that web server, which is the camera. And in this particular case, it's H.264 preview _01 main. And then finally, we have the name of the application that it's supposed to go launch at the remote system. Here I am over on my Home Assistant. And if I go down to Settings, and I go to Devices and Services, and we scroll down, you'll notice that I have the Android debug bridge, which says that it is configured. Once you turn on USB debugging, I expect that you'll have the Android debug bridge automatically show up in the discovered options, and then all you have to do is go through the configuration of it, which is fairly simple. And so we can go in here because I have mine configured previously, and if I click on the one device, you can see that it is an AFT KRT. It provides some kind of arbitrary name for my Fire TV 4K Max 2nd edition, and it says I have Android debug bridge. As it turns out, I also have the Unify network control on it as well, but that's really another subject. And then we have the controls for the Fire TV here, where I have the ability to turn it off and on, and I also have the ability to do diagnostics. So I believe if I come up here and, if I back up one level and I come back in here and click on this option, it'll come up with Android debug bridge, and here I can click on the three-dot menu next to it and look at the two entities. And so a couple of these entities are from the Unified network, but the other two here in the middle are related to the ADB, or Android debug bridge. And so one of them is basically for diagnostics, which is the first one, and the second one that shows a screen is the one that is used for the remote control player. And if I go and hit the three dots here and do a device info, well, that's not what I wanted to do. That went back to the first screen. Let's go back and try this again. So I click this and I click the gear this time. It will tell me that my entity for this is media underbar player dot Fire underbar TV underbar family room. This video is not meant to be a comprehensive instruction manual for how to use Home Assistant, but the next place I want to go is over to the file editor. And in the file editor, I am going to go up here and select Browse the File System, and I'm going to go down and look at scripts.yaml. Has all of the scripts that I want to run on my Home Assistant system. And as examples here, I have several scripts listed. Show underbar front door provides the data entity media underbar player dot Fire underbar TV underbar family room, as all the rest of them do as well. And that just says that we are going to use the player through the Android debug bridge on my Fire TV 4K Max. And then it has the command here with the appropriate RTSP string. Now this first one here, the front door, is actually a RTSP string for a Unify Protect G6 turret camera. And then here the family room, as an example, has an RTSP stream for a Reolink camera. And so you would have the username and password embedded in the string as well. And then moving down here, the Pebbles camera has a RTSP string for a Reolink camera because it is a Reolink camera, and likewise the rest of these here are Reolink cameras as well. Next, I want to point out that if I go over to the configuration.yaml file in the file editor, towards the top of this file I have something that says script, and it says include scripts.yaml, and that's what allows the scripts file that we just saw to be included as a part of the configuration. recall the automations that we looked at previously. Next, we want to go over to settings and we want to go to automations and scenes. And so I created an automation called camera button pressed. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on it here. And I created this automation using the YAML. So I'm going to say edit in YAML. So something really important is if you watch the camera, or if you watch the channel, not the camera, if you watch the channel frequently, one of the things that you learn about is that it's very important in Docker Compose files to have everything properly aligned in the correct columns. And that means that indents are really important in YAML files. And that is absolutely true with Home Assistant, since Home Assistant uses a large variety of YAML files in the background. So my camera button pressed automation file here basically says camera button pressed is the name of the automation, and it says call the matching camera script, and we looked at the scripts previously when a momentary switch is toggled on. And so I have a series of momentary switches, that is 16 of them, to represent all 16 of my cameras. And I say if the trigger is one of these switches and it turns to on here, and if it turns to on, then it goes ahead and performs the appropriate action. This is a little bit like a case statement. So as an example, it says here that if the trigger entity ID is switch.show underbar front door, so there's a switch literally named show underbar front door, if that one turns to on, then it goes ahead and calls the script show underbar front door that we looked at previously. And likewise, we have a script that uses or checks for the state of all 16 of those switches, which activate all 16 of the camera scripts. During the process of setting up this automation, I created myself a dashboard, and this dashboard is controlled by a series of button cards, and it has 16 of these buttons here that represent each of my 16 cameras with an appropriate icon. If I go ahead and click on Edit Dashboard and then go up to the three-dot menu and go into the raw configuration editor, you can see the YAML code for this, and it's simply a grid of button cards that is 5 columns. And each button card calls a service, and the service that it calls is the appropriate script for each of the cameras that we want to go ahead and activate. So this button card was very handy in terms of being able to test out each of the cameras before I made them an automation tied to the switches. Here I am on a terminal on my desktop Linux machine where I have the Android development kit installed, and so therefore I have the ADB command. And just as a little bit of a test here, I'm going to go ahead and do an ADB connect to the address of my phone at port 5555, which is the default port for ADB connectivity. And it says failed to connect, connection refused. And sometimes this will occur. And so just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and plug this in and see if I can't make a connection with the USB cable. And so I'll just go ahead and do an ADB connect. And it says ADB connect host port, and here I am going around in circles, as I sometimes do in trying to make this connection. So I'll go ahead and say ADB TCP/IP 5555, and that establishes the port number, and so it says restarting with that particular port. And I can do an ADB devices, and since I plugged it in via USB, it should show up, and sure enough it does. At this point, I can disconnect my phone from the USB cable, and now I should be able to come back and do the ADB connect on port 5555, and sure enough it now says it's connected, so it's connected wirelessly. And the reason I connected to my phone is so that I have the opportunity to illustrate the settings that I made in the Alexa mobile application. So in order to do that, I have the application SCR-CPY, which stands for screen copy, and that will go ahead and bring up my screen for my phone online here. So I have an automation, or rather a routine, that is called turn on front door switch when saying show me the front door. And I know it kind of concatenated that here, but basically what it is it says when anyone says show me the front door, it turns on the switch show underbar front door. So that is a very simple automation to accomplish this. And I just performed an ADB disconnect for my phone because the next thing I plan to do is to connect to my Fire TV 4K Max 2nd edition. And so now I'm going to connect to my Fire TV with an ADB connect and then the address of the Fire TV. And it now says it's connected. So my next step will be to fire up screen copy, and when screen copy comes up, I should see my Fire TV displayed on screen. And sure enough, I do. Let me go ahead and bring it over to this screen. And right now, it's playing a YouTube channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, show me the front door. And that will go ahead and call the Fire TV script by turning on the switch, and it should go ahead and make the connection to the camera. Unfortunately, it looks like it's only going to support one ADB connection at a time, so I'm going to go ahead and disconnect from this and go and video it directly. So I'm going to do a ADB disconnect from that system because Home Assistant is the thing that is going to have to perform the connect directly, and so therefore we'll have only one ADB connection at a time from Home Assistant rather than trying to connect from my desktop computer and also from Home Assistant. Alexa, show me the front door. Alexa, return. Something I forgot to point out earlier was that on my Fire TV 4K Max 2nd edition, I went into the App Store on the device and I loaded the VLC application, since VLC is what we're using to display the RTSP streams of the cameras. Initially, I tried to use MX Player, and although it worked, the performance of VLC was far superior to MX Player. So here, just as a reminder, we're using ADB from Home Assistant to send over the RTSP stream to display on the Fire TV 4K Max, which keeps the automation completely local and completely private. The only place where I used the voice assistant was to be able to recognize my audible command to show the camera, but then all it did was turn on a switch, and when that switch is turned on, that initiates the automation, which calls the script, and then likewise sends the ADB command over to display the camera. So in summary, ADB is a power tool for remote control of Android TV devices such as Fire TV and NVIDIA Shield, and in fact it can be used to remote control any Android device. And Home Assistant has an ADB integration for this purpose, which we used in this video. And the HA-ADB can be used for both diagnostics and remote control functionality. And we showed how to create scripts to invoke a remote function to view an RTSP stream from Home Assistant using VLC. And we created an automation to trigger these scripts when a particular switch is turned on. And I used Alexa routines such as show me the front door to turn on the front door switch to initiate the display. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.